Right, greetings, hello, welcome back to the Philosophy Club here in the middle of France, in La Creuse. And apparently we've got the first signs of spring because the Les Grues, which is the wild geese have flown over this place, the little village, yesterday, I'm told. And it's always very beautiful. They make a lovely sound in the high sky. And you can see these V formations which go on for hours as thousands of them migrate, coming back from Africa and going north. So that's good. And then in the autumn, they go south to Africa. The first time I saw them, it's quite a moving thing. And this is one of the big migration routes for birds in Europe. From here they go on north up to Scandinavia, to Britain, to Norway and so on. And so, yes, a few comments about the state of the world again. But I'm going to focus on positive stuff. So, yes, the state of the world is rampant with violence and conflict and the tragedy of the Gaza war, Israel about to attack Khan Yunis, Biden saying, look, they're a bit over the top in the way they're doing this, and can they not? They've got to provide somewhere for the thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians that have taken shelter in Khan Yunis at the order of the Israeli army to move somewhere else. So I still think the answer is to negotiate a long-term peace settlement here. And my Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East has been calling this for a very long time. I've been to Israel and Palestine, talked to intellectuals there, talked to philosophers. You know, we all want peace. Nobody wants this kind of level of violence. I'm shocked that Hamas ever got a toehold in Gaza, and I am very mindful, as a historian, that it was partly down to Netanyahu and his Likud policy to promote Hamas, because he was trying to demote the Palestinian Authority, the legitimate government, under Yasser Arafat, so that, and it's the old sorcerer's apprentice. You create, a dark force thinking that's really good, it'll disunite the enemy, but then it comes back to bite you. And that's what's happened. We're watching a tragedy playing out in real time. So the answer is avoid all scheming, conspiracies, hate manipulations, and just act honourably and peacefully and truthfully. Follow the cosmic law, which Kant writes about, as well as the international law, which Pufendorf and other great legal experts, Grotius and Jeremy Bentham and all the others that more recently helped create the International Court of Justice and the UN. I've spoken twice at the UN headquarters in New York. It's absolutely the best kind of bulwark we've got against global barbarism, and it was created after World War II, which was the world went mad, created barbaric tragedy on a huge scale. There were Nazis roaming around this part of France, shooting people, destroying people if they, didn't accept their racist, anti-Semitic policies, and believed in liberty, equality and fraternity, which is what France believes in, which I do too. So we're that's why we have the Philosophy Club here, because it's important to fly the flag of reason and love, fraternity, and also liberty of thought, liberty of religion. These are primal values. I think that would be a very good thing if we could realise that they exist in all the religions. It's not you have to be secular to believe in those principles. No, in Islam, freedom of thought is absolutely central. In Judaism as well, and in Christianity. And the same with love. All three traditions are sworn to that. And also equality. So what I think intellectuals should be doing is emphasising the common universal principles in all faiths. When I met Hans Kung at an interfaith conference some years ago, we discussed this, and he wrote a book called Global Responsibility, which enunciates that. He was a great theologian at Tübingen University in Germany, and I'm like a mini version of Hans Kung saying that now. It's got to be said. And these people, if stolen, are mind space with their extremism. About the the Putin interview, I noticed one clip where he tried to justify Nazi actions in World War II. Putin was saying, yeah, it was all Poland's fault. Germany wanted peace and they had to invade Poland. I mean, what? I mean, Putin as a Russian should know the Nazis were horrendous in their attacks on Poland. And they also allied with Stalin's Bolsheviks to carve Poland up between two totalitarian systems. And my colleague, Tim Snyder has written about this in his book, The Bloodlands. Poland and a lot of the other parts of that part of Eastern Europe got carved up between the Bolsheviks and the Nazis. And millions and millions of people were killed by both sides. And in Poland, I've been to Auschwitz, I've known Poles whose relatives survived those horrors. And for a Russian leader to say the Nazis were justified in invading Poland is like, to me, just outside of the pale of what responsible leadership should be about in the 21st century. He's a throwback to a sort of neo-Nazi Russian fascism. This is why I've been opposing Putin and all his skullduggery for the last... Ever since I realised how deeply he's involved in using intelligence agents to plant Brexit in the minds of my countrymen in Britain, as has been proved by very, very in-depth research by intelligence experts. We know now that he weaponised Brexit as a deliberate policy to get Britain out of the EU, to break up the EU so it would be a soft target. And on the basis of that, he then launched his invasion of Ukraine, and allied to that his weaponising of Trump and Trumpism. Trump is like a little mini Putin Mark II, using the same ideology, a sort of Christian nationalism, Christian fascism, white racism, a kind of triumphalism that, and an extreme negativity to all forces of unity and love, a dagger to the heart of everything that the European Union believes in and that I believe in and that France and Britain at its best believes in. So Putin may well want to talk to Tucker Carlson. These are the mouthpieces of this extreme right-wing propaganda. Don't fall for it. I'm just, warning people that this is dangerous stuff, and all the forces of righteousness and truth and international law should be rallied together to oppose Putin and Trump and Brexit, in my opinion. The Tories have to absolutely fall from power in the next election, as I believe will happen. So anyway, that's just a little aside what's going on in the world at the moment. It's difficult times, but we are coming out of, I think, the darkness. I've been asked to be involved in helping monitor the Indian elections to make sure they're free and fair, because there's doubts about what's going on in India. The BJP and Modi and the RSS, which is a neo-fascist Indian Hinduist organisation, are trying to turn India into a kind of Hindu fascist republic, which again tears up its constitution, which guarantees freedom of religion to every single Indian. It was written by a Buddhist. Ambedkar wrote the Indian constitution, and he became a Buddhist, a very great intellectual in that tradition of Indian intellectuals. And his secretary, Lakshmi Patti, came to see me in London when I worked with the Gandhi Foundation, and gave me lots of information about Ambedkar's work and why the Constitution of India matters so much. And it's not just mattering for India, it matters for the whole world that believes in democracy. It is the biggest democracy in the world. And what's happened there is that there are forces trying to turn it into a totalitarian fascist anti-democratic state, and they're weaponising the electronic voting machine system. The electronic voting machines of India have been hacked and can be hacked, and Modi's government, which has some very clever geeks working with it behind the scenes, is working away full on to hack the election and announce that he's won. But a team of people, other experts, are saying, no, hang on. They should be using paper ballots, which you can't forge so easily. And failing that, then monitors need to be in place to ensure these elections are free and fair. And I've been asked as one international expert, among others, to, help assist with that process, and I'll do that to the best of my ability. In Pakistan, meanwhile, we have an extraordinary thing, similar chaos caused by this. Imran Khan, I've always respected him intellectually. He's a graduate of the University of Oxford, where I taught. When he was Prime Minister of Pakistan, he gave some brilliant speeches to the UN General Assembly. He's a true intellectual, is old Imran Khan. And now he's been stuck in jail. He's had fake charges brought against him. They weaponize the legal system to get rid of people that, think too much. And poor chap's languishing in jail. But his party has still won the elections. His party... although it was disallowed from standing, they put all kinds of things in its way, nevertheless has won more MPs than any other party in Pakistan. So we're now waiting with bated breath to see if he'll be allowed out of jail to actually become Prime Minister. If there was any justice in the world, that would happen. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, Oxford University's Chancellor, Chris Patten, has stepped down. Thank you, Chris. Well done. You've done it for quite a while. It's time to move on. And so there's an election for the University of Oxford Chancellorship, which is like the top chap in charge of University of Oxford. And every graduate of the university gets to vote, everyone with a master's degree from Oxford. And Imran Khan is standing as Chancellor of the University of Oxford, along with a bunch of others. Tony Blair, I think probably not Tony, your best move is to stay out of that stuff. And then also a bunch of ex-Tory leaders, former prime ministers and all kinds of Tory has-beens that shouldn't be in the running, in my opinion. We had a Tory, Chris Patten, now it's time for someone else. And I think Imran Khan should get the job. He was Chancellor of the University of Bradford, which has a brilliant peace studies department. He's a genuine intellectual, he's a Muslim, but a true, moderate, intelligent intellectual Muslim. And it would be a great sign to the Pakistani military that have tried to put him in prison if he was elected Chancellor of the University of Oxford. So if you have a vote, my vote's with Imran. I don't have a vote. I just taught there. I wasn't a graduate. I'm a graduate of the University of London, so we don't get a vote. But that would be fun, wouldn't it, if Imran got elected there. So there are little signs of, seeds of life flourishing in spite of the time of darkness. And we have a candle here for St. Bridget. We've just passed her day in Imbolc. And we have a green candle to celebrate that energy from Ireland, the saint who was a druidess from ancient wisdom times as well. Okay, I think other things may come up, but let's move on to look at our tools that we can use to try and make sense of the world. Okay, so let's start with the periodic table, which I do every week, and I think it's really good. We'll start with two of those, and then I have a slightly different thing. Before we move on to look at the tarot of the gods, I'm going to suggest a slightly different protocol, but let's start with our periodic table. Choose one, or either by design or by choice. And okay, what have you found?
106, NRM Satanism. It was selected by chance.
Right, 106, Satanism. Okay, I don't think we've had that before, have we? No. Interesting. Right, thank you. And that's a new religious movement, it's called, classified as. And what are you going to have, Sophia?
It is Methodist Christian.
Well, there we are. Okay, excellent. And that's number what?
48.
48. Okay, fine. Right, well, that's very interesting. Which came first is a whole big discussion. But since we include Satanism here as a new religious movement, although it would claim to be one of the oldest, let's say that the Christians are there first, and we'll go with the Methodists to begin with, and then I'll come to the Satanism. Christian Methodist, yes. I've been to the church of John Wesley, who founded the Methodist Church in Islington, where I used to live for some years. And when I was teaching at the University of London, I lived in Islington. John Wesley's chapel is there. He was an Anglican vicar who he felt that the traditional Anglican church in the 18th century wasn't enthusiastic enough. It was too, like, well, we won't talk about anything difficult. We'll just avoid difficult theological questions. We'll just have another cup of tea, and we'll do the rituals. The Anglicans like their rituals, swinging the incense, saying the prayers, and all that stuff. But Wesley felt that actually he had a sort of religious conversion experience when he heard someone preaching. And he realised that if you're going to be a Christian, you might as well do it properly. And that has to be an inward thing. It can't be just a thing on rituals and on paper. There had to be like a spiritual fire in there. And and he obviously had a very sincere conversion experience. He was already an Anglican vicar, but then he had this extra thing. And the Church of England is a funny thing because it doesn't like people to be too enthusiastic. The British character, certainly the English character, looks askance at people that are too religious. They prefer a sort of sceptical veneer. It's fine to go to church on a Sunday now and then, but don't take it too seriously. The religion of England is more like cricket, bridge club, Ascot. It's the season is, coming out, for people that belong to that set. And they did in the 18th century. So it was a class-based kind of thing, and religion was just part of it. Wesley said that's not good enough. Now, if you actually read the Bible, the Gospels, which he did, then then you've got to take it seriously. And Christ wants, for instance, an end to poverty. So the Methodists became activists in what we call the social gospel. He wasn't there to give comfort to the rich upper classes that dominated English society. And by going to church, they think they've got God on their side. Wesley said, no, you don't have God on your side unless you actually walk the talk. My friend, the historian E.P. Thompson, who was a socialist historian who founded European nuclear disarmament back in the 90s when I was active in the early peace movement, in the 80s even, he wrote a whole book called The History of the English Working Classes, which is a masterpiece of historical research. He went back to the original pamphlets, and he discovered the Methodists were very active in the course of the 18th, 19th centuries in organising trade unions and working class workers to take their rights seriously and demand the vote for women and men, to demand the vote even if you were poor and homeless or whatever. And since then there's been a long tradition of Methodists who are active in what we call left-wing politics, because of their commitment to Christ and to the vision that he stood for, which is justice. I would say liberty, equality and fraternity, actually, is the esoteric element that Christ stood for. And so the Methodists are quite interesting. His brother, Charles Wesley, was a hymn writer and a musician, and he wrote loads of hymn tunes that are very famous. Methodists love to come together and sing hymns on a Sunday, and they're very moving. Think back to things like Amazing Grace. I think that was a Methodist who wrote that. Some of these tunes and the message are really profound. When I discovered that Margaret Thatcher was married in the Wesley Chapel and that she herself came from a Methodist background, I realised that not all Methodists are necessarily on the left. And there is a sort of, she was a lower middle class grocer's background and used to believe in counting her pennies and, doing everything right. And, well, if you're poor and unemployed, it's your fault, get out and get a job. That kind of conservatism, I don't agree with that thinking. And I was a bit appalled. I think Margaret Thatcher lost her authentic, spiritual calling and introduced some quite divisive things into British society, like smashing the miners during the miners' strike, and also smashing the alternative sun-worshipping Druids and hippies who used to go to Stonehenge every summer solstice. And under Margaret Thatcher, she sent police in to literally smash up their vans in the Battle of the Beanfield in 1984-5, and many people were injured and traumatised. And then for 10, 15 years after that, they ringed Stonehenge with a police cordon to stop any pagans getting into their temple. Okay, that's Thatcherism, and I remember those dark days, and I was appalled that, that she somehow in her mind thought that Methodism could justify all this. So yes, and so as an Anglican myself, I would say the trouble with Methodism is, although I love its good bits, is you can sort of twist it, like all these things. Like Nixon was a Quaker, for God's sake, what? Richard Nixon, one of the most corrupt American presidents ever, claimed to be, was raised as a Christian Quaker, which is another box. So I think we have to be on our guard about what, people that use religion as a kind of veneer of respectability. I've met people from all religions on the planet, I think probably pretty much all of them, and I judge people by the quality of their action and their heart and their moral purpose. And some Methodists are amazing. Some have let the show down, I would say. But then, hey, who hasn't? I mean, Christ himself let who is without sin cast the first stone. The thing about the term Methodist, what does that mean? It means what John Wesley wanted was he felt people should have a method to reach truth. So it's not enough just to go to church every now and then and occasionally read a bit of a Bible text. No, you need a disciplined life. You need to regularize your habits, deal with your addictions, deal with your bad thoughts, bad feelings. So he was more of a Buddhist. Thich Nhat Hanh said Buddhism isn't a religion, it's a method for reaching enlightenment. And I think Wesley was right in saying that we need a method in Christianity. I don't agree with all his methods, and I don't think he certainly didn't have much knowledge of other religions. He didn't really understand that there's validity in Buddhism and Sufism and Islam and Zoroastrianism and all the others. He didn't really have a knowledge of all that. But his instinct was, I think, pure. I think the Methodists also played a big role in fighting the slave trade, and they opposed it because it was against Christ's gospel. If you take liberty, equality and fraternity seriously, in its Christian form, you can't practice racist slavery. So anyway, 3 cheers for the good sides of it, and pity about Thatcherism. Okay, let's move to the next one, which is an interesting one that you've chosen. Satanism, a new religious movement, box 106. So I'm writing a paper about the periodic table at the moment, which I'm publishing hopefully in an academic journal, and I use this example of Satanism as an example of how the table works, because of course there are many people in the world who say, why is Satanism in there? I don't want my faith, Methodism or whatever, to be associated with that. How can you put it on the table? Isn't that the devil? Isn't that evil? Well, firstly, by having a tradition on the table, I'm not endorsing it. I'm not saying this is a good thing. Let's all follow this. The table is an objective scientific tool, just as the periodic table of the elements is a tool. There's carbon, there's hydrogen, there's nitrogen, there's oxygen in the table of the elements. It doesn't mean I prefer this one to that one. There's also plutonium, which is incredibly dangerous, but it is part of nature, and there is plutonium and uranium, so one can't leave them off the table. Satanism is the kind of plutonium of religions, and in fact Pluto, after whom plutonium is named, is the god of the underworld for the ancient Greeks. He was the closest they got to Satan, and he captures Persephone, and he's the baddie in Greek mythology. They didn't really have a devil, because even Pluto can be reasoned with, and he gave up Persephone 6 months of the year. Pluto was the Latin designation. Hades was the Greek. So, but the point I made in my essay is that, actually Christianity, as we know it, is has to have a Satan figure to fight against. According to the Gospels, as far as we can tell, Christ believed in Satan and was always fighting him and saw his mission as defeating Satan. So there was a sort of fight going on in Christ's mind. He's saying things like, "Get thee behind me, Satan." And in the temptations of Christ after his baptism, he goes into the wilderness and Satan tempts him 3 times. And Christ says no. One was to turn stones into bread because he's hungry. No, can't do that. Go away, Satan. The other was to go to a very high place and jump off and fly. Satan said, I'll give you the power. And Christ said, no, go away, Satan. And the other was to give him all the kingdoms of the world under his dominion, that he'd become supreme king of the universe. And Christ said, go away, Satan. But ironically, if you look at it as a psychohistorian, which is one of the things I am, Christianity did end up turning, things into, bread into the body of God, and did end up taking over quite a lot of the kingdoms of the world. So the Satanist position on this, as I've studied it, and I've talked to Satanists and I've read their literature and I know what their thinking is that dualistic thing that Christ did and that Zoroastrianism does and that Manichaeanism did and the boxes 120, 121, 122, the Persian religions did, was they made all of history like a huge titanic struggle between absolute good and absolute evil. There's an absolute good, God, Ahura Mazda, God, whatever you want to call him. And then there's an absolute evil, which is Ahriman or Satan or Lucifer. Has different names and different traditions. And they think that all of history is this like a fight to the death, like an American horror movie. And the goodies are going to win, which is, and you can fill in the blank, it's the Christians or the Muslims or the Jews, because they all believe in this story that Satan is the baddie. And they use the Bible to justify their anti-Satanism, which makes them the good guys of history. So in the Israeli army now attacking Gaza, I am absolutely 100% sure there will be people saying, those Gazans, they're all just Satanists. We're going to kill them, Tragically, in the people of Gaza, they'll be saying the same of the Israeli army. They'll be saying, those Israelis, they sold their soul to the devil years ago. And look what they're doing. What do you expect? So this idea of Satan is actually quite dangerous. It can be used geopolitically to attack your enemy. Putin has used it. When he invaded Ukraine, he said on television, I'm going in to kill the Satanists. He's accused the West, Ukraine in particular, of being run by satanic forces. And he's taken out of the swamp of history all the conspiracy theories the Nazis used to circulate with their anti-Semitic stuff about the protocols of the Elders of Zion and anti-Freemasonry and anti-rationalism and all that anti-science. And so anybody that opposes his messianic vision, Putin's messianic vision, is by definition a Satanist because he believes he's the forces of righteousness. The Russian Orthodox believe they're the only true Christians. Everyone else on the table are Satanists. And I was told that by the head of interfaith studies for the Russian Orthodox Church, who refused to sign my interfaith peace treaty. The only religion that refused, by the way. So the Satanists say that they're all crazy, these religions. That, the whole idea of history being a battle between good and evil is just not factually true. It's an evolutionary process. As human beings are becoming wiser and more compassionate, it's a journey towards enlightenment. And yes, there's evil and there's trials and temptations we have to cope with. life is certainly a learning zone, but it's not intended that that the forces of evil should win or destroy the planet, and therefore don't have to be themselves absolutely destroyed. They need educating, they need transforming into light workers. And this was the insight of the Enlightenment period in European history. So the idea of Satanism as a sort of faith that one could follow, it was there sometimes in old witchcraft circles, old pagan circles, where they worshipped Diana. And there's a book called Aradia, which said that Diana, the goddess of the pagans, had a love affair with Lucifer. And they produced a child called Aradia, a daughter, the Shining One. And witches' covens all over Europe, Wiccans, they take that story as a true story, and they believe that Diana was the Queen of the Heavens, is the Queen of the Heavens, and Lucifer is her lover, and they see nothing wrong with celebrating that, because they celebrate life, the life force. So in their theology, Lucifer isn't evil, he was the light bringer. So you have those kind of pagans. They seem to have been around a long time. Aradia was first written down as a story in the 12th century, apparently, or may have happened around then. There's no consensus among historians of witchcraft. Ron Hutton, my colleague at the University of Bristol, doesn't go back into all that. But we know it's been circulating as a story. And the furious anti-witchcraft persecutions of the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries in Europe, in which millions of mostly women but also men were killed for cavorting with Satan. I think it's a blot on history. Women were psychic, they had powers of healing, they were interested in esoteric stuff, the occult, and to declare them all legions of Lucifer, I think was false and wrong. And anyway, I don't think it gave the church the right to hunt them down with inquisitions and persecute them and torture them, as they did. And out of that trauma came the Enlightenment, because legal voices, great thinkers like Montesquieu and Beccaria in Italy, began to say we shouldn't torture people for their beliefs. There should be freedom of belief in Europe and in the world. We shouldn't persecute people for if they want to believe in X or Y or Z, whichever box they want to follow on the table. They should have freedom, as long as they don't harm people, as long as they don't, And it's interesting, Elizabeth I, the Anglican queen in England in the sort of early Tudor period, which was quite an enlightened leader, she said of witches, I'm not going to persecute them, but unless they do evil deeds with their powers. If a witch uses power to kill somebody or to burn somebody's house and misuses their occult powers, then the law should go after them. But in other words, Elizabeth accepted the idea there might be such things as white witches, people that would be having certain esoteric powers and use them for good. And Dr. John Dee, who was her astrologer, I think was one of those. He was more of a druid. He wasn't really a witch, but he was certainly a druid elder. And there were people in Britain, Shakespeare writes about them in the Midsummer Night's Dream. So that Elizabethan Renaissance had a place for the queen of fairyland, Titania, who was like Diana, the goddess, come back. So I want to tell a story about Voltaire, because he symbolises the Enlightenment position on the devil. He was a Freemason, he was a member of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, so the kind of Putin types that think all Freemasons are devil worshippers really don't like Voltaire and all that he stood for, which was freedom of thought, rigorous use of intellect, and so on. And towards the end of his life, he was in retirement in his chateau near Geneva.